My name is Hans Trupp. I'm a longtime sea kayaker, a TRAK pilot, and a team member of TRAK Kayaks. I'm hailing from Vancouver Island at the moment, the far west coast of British Columbia. And this is Keys to Avoiding Deep Trouble. Welcome. This program is part of a series we call Beyond the Boat that includes 3 steps to kayaking and keys to avoiding deep trouble, and where we address topics of risk management, leadership, communication, and seamanship, where we all learn from the experience of others to develop better judgment, and our aim is to be the rising tide that floats all boats. So welcome. Today's subject is a risk management topic on pod management, specifically keys to effective on-the-water group management. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our guest. Keith Braun is a founding member of the TRAK Pilot team. He's a level 3 TRAK pilot and works with us to lead some of our TRAK experiences. Most notably, he's on deck for the Pacific Rim Surf Camp as a lead instructor, which we're on hold with, but we hope will go because it's one of our flagship camps and tours. And Keith is also a Paddle Canada Level 1 instructor. And he is a Vancouver Island guide and a retired paramedic, and recently moved much closer to the coast. And welcome to the call, Keith.
Good to see everybody here.
And so, thank you. Keith, you know, I know you're not only a guide, but you're also a professional in a way. You're a real estate professional. You've got a business called Real Pros, and so you kind of balance a very professional life of professional services along with kayaking. Just a great point to help people get to know you more. A couple of things I'd like to help orient people to is, you know, some of your most recent outings. Tell us about what you've been up to in terms of paddling lately.
Oh man, well, as you mentioned, my wife and I just recently moved out to the coast. I've said many times I've been living out on Vancouver Island for about 20 years now, and finally just made that dream a reality. And so we're paddling pretty much daily right now, revisiting all our old haunts and exploring new haunts, and also planning a bunch of multi-day trips this summer. So.
Terrific, fantastic. And so, what's the lineup for you, Keith? What's on the agenda for your paddling trips this summer?
Well, obviously, the Pacific Rim Surf Camp in May is hopefully that still goes. I'm hoping that it does. But beyond that, I'm looking at the Broughton Group. That's one of my favorite places on the east side of the island. So go back in there for a week or 10 days, and then of course the discoveries, and then further north would love to get up to you know, just further north on the island. I haven't paddled really further north than the Broughton, so Brooks Peninsula is on the list as well for this year. So
fantastic, great. So let me ask you this question, Keith. What do you love most about coaching sea kayaking?
Well, for sure, the thing that really gets me just stoked every time I go out with new paddlers is hearing them say, "Oh, I can't do that," or "I can't imagine myself doing that," or "That's beyond my skill." And then working with them to the point where they're kind of looking back retrospectively and kind of going, "Holy crap, I can't believe I did that. That is awesome." So it's the progression that I see in students, you know, hour to hour and day to day.
That's so fantastic, Keith. That's so well aligned with the, you know, TRAK's core purpose, which is we call it Life Unleashed, and it sounds like you really live that every day. And it's no wonder that you're such an integral part and important member of our community. So thanks for sharing that. So the subject title from today's event is really Elements of Effective Pod Management. Tell us, if you would, Keith, why is that so important?
Well, pod management, I mean, you know, it's the one thing that's most commonly overlooked, especially in divergent waters. People go out and they just make the assumption that everybody's going to be in the right place at the right time, and that's when things get you know, go upside down, and you know, you turn a safe environment into an unsafe environment very quickly by mismanaging the people that are within your group. So.
Cool, fantastic. I'd like to hear from folks in the audience while we're talking. I'm going to launch a poll here, and I want to know in what way the subject matter of effective pond management is important to you. So there's a poll there. I invite people to connect with that. This is open for everybody on the call to just choose what's most valuable for you in terms of why this is super important. This will give us a sense of how to really shape the conversation and the content. As we do that, I want to know, Keith, what's the overall goal of this content today and the presentation of this to our community of paddlers?
Well, our focus is going to be on pod management, but leading up to it is super important. And I think we're going to get into it a little bit later. But the acronym PEER that I came up with leads into that. In that, you can have all the good intentions on the water, but unless you've done pre-planning prior to getting on the water, you're setting yourself up for failure. And so our goal today is going to be starting from the beginning, from the concept of an idea of a paddle to putting that paddle together, inviting the right people into that paddle, and then executing that paddle, and then looking back at your successes and failures. So that's kind of going to be our goal.
Yeah, fantastic, terrific. So I guess that could translate to really just having fun too. So I'm going to share the results of this poll for everyone. And in what way is the subject matter of effective pod management important to you? It seems like the leading thing here is, as an experienced group of members among friends or in paddling clubs, is the leading piece here. It sounds like that's the most important. And so that's super fantastic. I think that's consistent with our experience about where the biggest challenge is. And you've done that, Keith. You've guided professionally, you've paddled with friends in group settings. And so where do you find, setting up effective pod management as the biggest challenge? Would you say it's institutional or among peers?
Well, each has its challenges, but I would say personally, my personal experience would be amongst peers, for sure.
Terrific. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if you want me to expand on that, Hans, or.
No, I think that's good. Let's talk about that. I think that's really consistent with what this audience is also indicating as the key thing. We've got a couple of comments here in the chat box, so I invite people to do that. Irvin stating that it's super important as he works as a guide and we travel in some high traffic areas with a variety of conditions and sometimes unexpected hazards. And so that element of the unexpected is one of the driving forces. So with your permission, folks, I'd love to just bring in a couple of slides here to present something that Keith has invented for us today around this subject. And you've got a really great acronym about some of the key points on effective pod management in the water specific to paddling among friends and a community. Help us unpack that a little bit, if you will.
You're referring to PEER, the acronym PEER. Yeah, I came up with this while just putting the content together, and it just sort of seemed to fall into place perfectly. And so, as I mentioned before, proper pod management on the water is really a moot point unless you've done exceptionally good planning ahead of time. So PEER just stands for plan, execute, plan, educate, execute, and review. The plan portion of it is a pre-trip portion. Never can be overestimated the importance of planning. And then the education part is on the beach prior to actually putting paddles in the water. Execution is on the water, and then review is at the end of the day, looking back and look at your successes, look at your failures, getting feedback from your peers.
Terrific, Keith. Let's unpack these a little bit and really let's help give some tools and a program for everyone to help them going out with clubs or paddling with peers, where we understand that's one of the most hardest places to really get effective pod management under control in a way to respond to the dynamic environment, unexpected or unforeseen hazards that might come up. So let's dive into that. Tell us more about the planning prior to paddling.
Well, I mean, the initial idea of a plan comes with a concept, an idea that a place you want to paddle. So generally somebody who's putting the paddle together has an intent or an idea as far as where they want to paddle and what kind of waters they want to paddle on. And so that's why I started with route choice. Route choice is the very beginning. It's the idea, it's a concept that's in your mind that you want to put together. And in your route choice, you just want to make sure that the conditions that you're anticipating can be accomplished within the route that you're planning. And so you put together your concept, and you be realistic around that. You look at all your goals and objectives of that day, and you choose within that route whether that's going to be a good one or whether you want to have an alternative one to choose. So it's the very beginning. It's an idea that you put down.
Okay, great.
Part of the process.
And how about on the user side?
Well, we're getting now into your choice of paddlers that you're going to bring along with you, and you just have to make sure that those paddlers are actually confident, and prepared to paddle the waters that you're planning. So within that, you need to choose your group well. Now, sometimes as a professional, you don't get to choose your group, but you choose your waters based around your group, right? So it's one can be before the other. It really depends upon what your circumstances are in front of you.
Great. So if I understand this right, really what you're doing in a very intentional effort of the planning prior to paddling is to ensure that your objective and subjective hazards are considered, and that you're ensuring a good fit between those two things. That is the route with a given set of conditions and the people who you're going to be with in that group. That's terrific. Fantastic. You've offered some great ideas on, a very high level specific pre-trip information and a couple of bullet points on how to know your paddlers exactly, which is, their attitudes, their skills, and, their mindset toward those particular conditions or challenges. So I know this is just a very high level look, and I just want to let folks know that I'm going to share with you in the chat room in just a second a link of a very comprehensive document and checklist that Keith has prepared to accompany this presentation. So let's move on past planning to the educate part. Let's unpack that one.
Okay, well, before we go on that, yeah, I think just to kind of reiterate to the listeners right now that pre-trip information is all within the document that Hans is going to share with you, and it's way too much for us to cover right here right now. So with the to avoid sacrificing our time of Q&A at the end of this, I'm going to get you guys to reference the document that Hans will share with you, and that'll take you into the sequence of route planning and also pre-trip planning and all the details within that. So regarding education, obviously now you've decided in your mind what route you want to paddle, what your goals and objectives are around the paddle, what people that you've invited into your paddle. Everybody's all stoked, they're excited about this trip. You arrive on the beach, everyone's just geared up to go and jump in the water. But before you do so, it's really important to educate. Obviously, take the time on the beach before paddles are in the water, and review exactly what you're going to do for the day. Go through all the goals and objectives of the day, the route, the waypoints along the route, why each waypoint is in place, what the purpose of that waypoint is, set up communication protocols. Discern who has radios, who doesn't have radios, go through whistle calls, go through paddle calls, and make sure that everybody's properly geared, that they have the proper boat in place, that they have the prerequisites. And as I mentioned before as well, inevitably, you may have a closed invite group, but someone brings a friend. Now you got to stop everything and make sure that that friend is properly equipped, properly educated, properly got the prerequisites, and are ready to go confident and competent about the water so we can paddle. So education on the beach is super important. And I think this is probably, especially in the peer setting amongst friends, this is the one that's overlooked most often. People just jump in the water, usually get the people that are most excited. They're in the water and they're like, 100 meters offshore waiting for everyone to go, and you got to draw them back in and reorientate them, and maybe even just re-express the importance of this educational piece so that they understand that, you know, what they're getting into and what the goals of the day are. So.
Terrific, fantastic. I love how you've really stated that is, you know, two things you've recognized here. One is everybody wants to get on the water fast, as that's like the goal in people's heads, and they often, you know, bypass or abbreviate this very important section. And the other thing that you highlighted really well is just being super clear, without distractions, of what the expectations are. And it sounds like from a leadership side, really focusing on establishing those roles while you're sitting on the beach, making those really clear to everybody is an essential piece that can often be rushed over. And that sounds like that's the cornerstone or the crux, if you will, of having a successful pod management on the water. And I totally hear what you're saying, that if you get on the water without this step, then it's really hard to reel people back in. If you haven't really set this up, this is a lot harder to do when people are managing their boats or, you know, diving into, you know, a wildlife engagement or paddling near rocks. So this is a really fantastic step. And I love how you've, you know, sort of intentionally set this up as on the beach as a briefing to get clear on that. You know, it's the leadership and roles that can be the most challenging with peer groups, I think, as we've said. But one of the things that you'd mentioned is, you know, somebody else pops into the group you didn't expect. You know, resetting, going back to the planning stage and going back to the step is like, oh, well, is this person actually still a good fit for the pre-trip information we've already determined, instead of just going with the flow? Really great part of that. Now, what about, you talked about confirmation about those things. What about accountability here? How do we start the accountability process in the education on the beach?
Well, I mean, it needs to be, I mean, again, it depends on whether it's a, you know, professional setting or it's whether it's a kind of a social setting. As I mentioned before, I think most people would agree that it's a social setting that's usually the toughest, because of course you got people with different expectations and really not necessarily abiding by one specific leader that's spearheading the group. So I think leadership is super important to identify well in advance, and it's usually the person that's putting the paddle together in a social setting that's the leader. And they can bring in or call in their invite list other known leaders that he can assign within the group as well. But accountability comes to down to, for example, small things like if somebody hasn't brought the proper gear, right? Well, how do you address that? You know, if it's an immersion issue, well, that's a no-go. In my view, if the water temperature deems that you need to have a dry suit, or at the very least, you know, neoprene suit, then if they don't have it, they don't go. And it's one of the hardest things to do as a leader and of a group is to decline someone from going. And I'll emphasize this a little bit, Hans, because it was a mistake I once made. And it was, you know, being the leader of that group, I had a newcomer that came, and I questioned his capability, and you know, I was given some assurance that he did have he was capable, but my intuition, my gut feeling is that he wasn't, and it didn't turn out well. So I want to express to everyone that's listening right now that it's a really hard thing to do, but if you have to do it, if you have that intuition, or if it's clear, like someone doesn't have immersion gear, decline their participation, because everybody else has come, they've come prepared, they've abided by the prerequisites, and you have one person that hasn't, they don't get to ruin the day for everyone else. So tough thing to do.
That's really fantastic what you say. And one of the things that we study a lot on some of our track trips is the roles of leadership, the difference between designated leadership, peer leadership, active followership, and self-leadership. And certainly paddling among peers, those areas can be a little bit gray. And so helping to define those, it sounds like, is an essential piece. And as an active followership or even peer leadership, stepping up and making the call. I got a couple of chats here that I want to put out here. Is Bill says that when he leads a club trip, that he first does a telephone interview with each person who wants to come using a checklist. Which is really great. And he's asked for the checklist that we're using. And so we'll include that. And Bill, I know that some folks here are asking for the checklist you're using as well. So you can either drop that in the chat as a file, or you can send this to us and we can push it out on the blog post. So let's move on to the next piece. And this is the next letter of peer is the execute. Let's unpack that one, Keith.
Well, when you're executing your goals and objectives on the water during the day, I think everybody needs to know their roles and stick to it. In other words, if you're a participant, be a participant. If you're a leader, be a leader. And prior to being on the water, all the leaders are going to talk as well about their roles and how they're going to execute their roles as well. So execution on the water has everything to do with pre-planning prior to putting paddles in water, right? So. Yeah. The other thing that I'd like to be really emphasize with execution on the water is flexibility. So we can have the best plans in the world, and you know, but the sea has a whole other agenda, and it can change very quickly. So good leaders will understand what to expect on the water, but they also understand the variabilities of water and how that may change very quickly, along with weather as well. And so good decisions on the water has to do with not reactory decisions, it's proactive decisions. So in other words, you're always anticipating ahead of time as far as, you know, you're coming to a headland and you know that the weather state and, you know, the swell forecast, the wind forecast, everything suggested maybe a 1 meter swell, and you get there and it's actually built up to 2 or 3. And now you've got big rebound to consider, and you're at a waypoint that's a safe point to hold. Now you've got to rediscuss as a leadership team and also as a group whether that headland is worth going forward on, or whether you readjust your plan. So flexibility all day long.
Okay, so always evaluating, always have a system for decision making. And you had identified before in the pre-planning the importance of waypoints, which are often like predetermined choice points that you can imagine before you either expose yourself to more hazard or you know, commit to the, you know, another segment of the trip. So let's talk about formation for a minute with regard to execution, Keith.
Yeah, I think everyone can see that graph that you have there. On the left side is just a basic formation in open water. There's really no, you know, science behind that. A is basically indicates the lead, or sorry, the lead instructor or the group leader, and that person is able to just advance ahead or drop behind and have good communication with the participants. The participants is the yellow and red kayak, indicated as D. So the leader or group leader should be in good contact with the people at all times. The person in the front, B, that person is actually knows the float plan very well. They can navigate well. They're the person that's going to set the pace for the group, and that pace should be catered to the lowest capable paddler, the slowest paddler. And you know, the lead paddler should be in constant communication with the group leader, A, preferably by radio on a designated channel. And then finally the sweep, the C paddler. That paddler as well should have excellent paddling skills, good rescue skills, and have the appropriate rescue equipment. They're the person that's going to make sure that the group stays in line, and that they're if anybody does go over, that he's able to come in quickly and perform an assisted rescue as well. So pretty basic.
Okay, perfect. So you know, overlaying this with flexibility, it sounds like what you're really illustrating is that you know, literally drawing you know, an expectation of pod formation in the sand, identifying what those roles are going to be: a point boat to set the pace, a sweep boat to hold the group together, and flank boats. it sounds like you're identifying that, putting the most experienced paddler, probably in the middle of the pack, like you said, as A, is probably a good idea for response time and flexibility.
Yeah, and again, that's predetermined by the leaders that are running the group, and this is just a principle to work with. There's lots of variances to this. One thing that I should point out is to the left of A is let's just say a headland with huge rebound. That's the hazard. So you're going to actually form your leadership line based upon the hazards that are presented, and you want to actually corral your group to keep them away from hazards.
Terrific. That's fantastic. Yeah. And so folks that can't see this in the chat I've just put the link to the Safe Kayak Guiding Principles that Keith has pulled together. It's a great document for everyone. And also Bill McKenzie has put in some elements here that are applicable both to peer paddling groups as well as institutional paddling groups, like paperwork and liability forms that are more applicable to institutional settings versus peer groups. But a great content. Thank you for that, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
So if we take a look back at the execution, then the key things that I'm hearing from you is to be really clear with the formation. Be really clear with the roles and responsibilities of those members on the team, and create designated leadership for those areas, and reinforce to everyone else that their leadership role is active followership in the pod management. I'm hearing that really helping hold people accountable to that and empowering those in that role to maintain that accountability is essential. And having really good communication within that execution. Let's talk about that for a minute, Keith. What are your keys, if you will, to effective communication? What are some principles here that we be striving for as a best practice?
Well, first of all, proximity. That's probably the one that's the cardinal rule is broken the most. If you can't hear your peers, you're too far away, and so that verbal communication must be constant. Sometimes, depending upon the waters that you're in, that's difficult. So that's when you move to radio communication, whistle communication, paddle communication. And again, that's part of your pre-trip educational part on the beach as well.
Okay, terrific. I love how you've kind of broken the communication into a continuum, right? And that is at the most conservative or prudent level, everybody maintains verbal communication in a normal talking voice. As you move beyond that, it's whistles, right? As you beyond that, it's radios, and beyond that, it might even be paddle signals. And it sounds like you can really adjust that expectation based on conditions. If you when you leave the beach, if you keep it really tight, you've got the most control. And as you continue, as you assess the situation, assess the paddlers, you can open that up. But you're really intentional about what level of communication are we expecting to use from now until our next waypoint.
Exactly.
And you can really be flexible with that, but identifying what that is at any given time to be specific about that expectation is key.
Yeah, and you made a good point, Hans. That the waypoints that I mentioned are reset buttons. There are times in the day a waypoint could be some safe waters within kelp or within a bay, just prior to a headland that you want to cross, or crossing with commercial boating in play. All these waypoints are reset buttons that you can re-communicate with your group and reset expectations and just bring them in as a group and get on the same page. So.
Keith, that's super fantastic. One other thing I'd like to add in from the group, Simon, who is a paddler that probably has a pretty international audience that speaks multiple languages. One other consideration to the verbal communication is that sometimes it can be harder to understand somebody speaking a non-native language in a noisy environment, like around a beach break or a point, or even just breaking swell, or even just with paddling. So that may need even to be tightened up. So, you know, there are some special considerations even with verbal that should really be practiced and exercised and not assumed, like understanding the language in a noisy environment. I paddle often with people who are hard of hearing, or can only hear from one side of their ear, or one ear out of the one side of their head, and they might need to be positioned specifically for that consideration. So great point, Simon. Appreciate you bringing that up. That's really awesome. And it sounds like you could, you know, I'm hearing also from Nadia, who's suggests that whistling, you know, learning those whistle signals and establishing those before you leave the beach as a primary method can be a great way to go. So you don't have to figure out what whistle signals are once you're underway. And if you're in a multi-language environment, maybe that's just a great way to lead as a primary source. So thanks for unpacking that. So what I understand really with the execution is the key elements are formation, accountability, decision-making on the way, and communication. What are some of the special considerations that you would offer, Keith?
Well, I mean, the special considerations could go back to, for example, you know, rock gardening. I know we didn't really cover that very well. I don't. Do you want me to go over that at all, Hans? The rock gardening element of it?
Yeah. Why don't we talk about sort of variations to that? You know, I think some of the special considerations would be, you know, either choosing to let the pod expand or go into multiple pods, or scouting a beach or doing a rock gardening. You know, you've got a strategy here for pod management, which might be just an interesting example to point out as a way that within a pod formation, you could break to that for a particular activity. Speak to that for just a moment, if you will.
Sure. Well, rock gardening is, I mean, it's again so divergent. It's just there's unlimited scenarios, and so you have to go by principles, not by trying to define or lay out every possible scenario. That's impossible. But you can see here that the two B boats are safety boats. You picture this this illustration, whereas there's a southeast swell coming in, and it's coming in the bottom end of the bay and pushing out the top end of the bay. And so the sea paddlers are participants. The one boat you don't see represented there is the lead paddler, or in some cases instructor. And they just position themselves wherever it's best, where they can actually communicate with the participants. And the principle behind this is for them to position themselves in a place where they can visually see, but at the same time be safe, and go through the sections one at a time. I've seen actually videos on YouTube. You can see them where, you know, guys that are rock gardening, and girls, of course, that are rock gardening, and they're all spilling through at the same time, and it's just it's a train wreck. So it's better to be organized, better to be well positioned. The boaters are in a place where they can control the people going in and also assist the people as they come out. It's all just common sense. But sometimes common sense doesn't really iron out well on the water. And so that's why pre-planning is really important.
And I'd like to add to that, Patrick David's chiming in here, and you know, the need to constantly reassess hazards and risks and plan transitions is super important. We've all heard the adage that complacency kills. And the moment you stop evaluating and assessing what's going on, that's a clear indication that the complacency's slipped in here. You know, Al Kwan has chimed in here about when you have various paddling experiences, some of the challenges, and the need to accommodate that. I'm going to ask Al, when we get to the discussion, to open up your mic and speak more to that. I'd like to hear more about that. And then Harold chimed in here and you know, discussed whitewater signals, work on the sea. Now, one thing I want to say to that, because I think, Harold, you bring a really great point, and that is that we all come from different areas, and we all might have a different understanding what paddling signals are. So it's super important to identify at the beach stage in that launch which paddle signals you're actually choosing to use for that one. Because if you're paddling in Canada, or you're in the US, or you're in Switzerland, or you're in France, I mean, you might all use different paddle signals in different cultures and clubs and areas. So really getting an alignment on that is critical. So thanks for that point.
And Hans, I'll just add this. One thing, I mean, you can have the best educational section on the beach and go through paddle communication, but it's quickly forgotten. And so one thing, if you find yourself going out into divergent waters with people that this is a concern, what I've done is I've taken paddle signals that are fairly universal, and I've laminated them, and I'll give them to the participants to take and put on their deck.
Great. Super great idea. Yeah, terrific. What a great reference. Yeah. So giving people a framework in advance increases that clarity, makes that communication much more simple, and creates better alignment around it. That's a really great idea. Bill has got some, Bill McKenzie's got some more checklists in the chat room, and it looks like he's trying to add a file here. So check that out. Let's move on then to decision making on the water. And one thing I'd like to bring up is as you speak about models and frameworks and laminating things for the deck for communication, one thing we've developed at TRAK is the decision making triangle that just gives us a systematic way to look at all of those considerations. This is also a file that I share with people in the chat room here, and this is just a handy tool that you can use both on the water and on your beach briefing, as well as in your pre-planning stages. It's just a checklist of understanding kind of a triangle of weather, sea state, objective hazards like route and terrain, and putting that in the middle of that, the human factor. Everything else is objective, in the middle is subjective. And just a quick little checklist just to make sure you're not overlooking one of those three key objective hazards, or the ever important subjective reality of your group or yourself. And just a good way to understand whether what you're moving into is an acceptable risk or not. So I invite people to download that and use it in your trips as well. The other resource that I'll just put in here is a passage plan that complements the one that Keith also provided. The TRAK passage plan just looks like this. We laminate it at TRAK for our trips. We put the decision-making triangle on the back, and this is a laminated piece that we use on our trips. And we use like a whiteboard marker to fill this out before every passage day, and just get really clear for all those objective and subjective realities that might exist. Let's move on then, Keith, to the last element of the peer model, which is review. Let's unpack that one.
Well, you've had a great day. You've been on the water for hours, and everyone's just super stoked about the day. And you get back to the beach, and what does everyone do? Well, they're tired. They've probably got other agendas. They want to hit the road, get home, whatever. And oftentimes the group is, some high fives all around, and people set off on the rest of their lives, and they really don't review back on what actually happened during the day. This is a great opportunity to bring everyone together. Now, again, the review portion needs to be preemptively given to the group at the beginning of the day, to say at the end of the day, I want to bring everyone together. I want to review how the day went. And some of the questions that could be asked was, what was your highlight of the day? And everyone will have some inputs into that. And then, well, what was your low point or disappointment of the paddle? And you really make some notes around that. Did today meet your expectations? All right. Was there anything that you would have changed? What did you learn? These are all excellent questions to get feedback as a leader from your group to understand how successful the day was. And, we don't grow as leaders unless we look back retrospectively on how we did and how we can improve for next time. So can't overstate the importance of that review moment on the beach.
Terrific. I love how you've taken the importance of running a debrief. We do this all the time in institutional settings, but to do this in a peer setting is really fantastic. And I love your tip on like seeding it at the beginning of the day to set that expectation up. With the idea of reinforcing best practices like your pod management, of really being able to integrate the learnings to help that experience increase everyone's capacity. The rising tide floats all boats, if you will, and then to celebrate that day on the water, to really make it concrete and to do some team building among that paddling group is really rich and often overlooked in a peer scenario. But it's so valuable for all of us, and to explore those leadership roles and to grow as a community of paddlers that you may be paddling with more often. That's really fantastic. Thank you for that, Keith. We've got some great comments in the chat. I welcome people to continue to comment. We're going to go pretty quickly here into a kind of an open discussion. So I invite you to if you have the opportunity to unmute yourself, you can do that. While we get ready for that, I invite you to put in any questions or comments you'd like to have answered in the chat room, and we'll address those. Or you can unmute as we get to that and put it in. Hey, it looks like Peter just showed up. Hey, Peter, how you doing? He was going to be leading a TRAK trip on ocean-wide expeditions that has been canceled, and here he is. Great to see you, Pete. So, hey, in closing, I just want to offer one thing, is that a final comment is we had an incident in TRAK that was very much related to pod management. What's interesting about this story is we've used this as a case study in our Keys to Avoiding Deep Trouble. For folks that want to download that, you can go to the website, you can see the Keys to Avoiding Deep Trouble kind of series, and we put together a case study on this on one of our own trips. There were all, it was 100% industry professionals. They were all guides and professional paddlers. And we had just spent the entire day talking about risk management. And we had just spent the last hour basically talking about the route and doing a pre-planning trip and doing a very extensive educational piece on the beach in our briefing. And then we launched out, and we had some dynamic conditions, and we actually had a pod management issue that resulted in a near miss. And what's interesting about that story is that you know, we were the people that it should be least likely to happen to, and it happened, and we were surprised by it. And so I guess the takeaway from that is this can happen. You know, pod management issues can happen for anyone, even if you're super careful. So the more formatted and disciplined you are at these principles, like the peer model that Keith has presented today, the more success you're likely to have in the water, paddling with peers and having effective pod management. So Keith, I want to thank you for your great value brought here, and certainly this model you've introduced to us, and to the extensive document we've added here to the Zoom chat. What would you offer as an action item for people to kind of like take away from this call?
Well, I think for sure we blew through in the peer acronym, we blew through the P and E real quick, planning and educate, especially the planning portion. I just encourage everybody to download that document and digest it. If you use the peer acronym, create habits, create good habits, and you only create good habits by repetitively doing it over and over and over again. So use the peer acronym for every trip you do, even small little trips, use it. And I think that when you use it a few times over and over and over again, it'll become second nature. And so my takeaway for everyone would be to take it one step further from this chat and review the document. There's lots of good references in there. And, you know, I'm just one of many incredible, like there's a lot of people in this chat group that have a whole lot more experience than I do. So reach out to others around you and use it as an evolving or living document that you can improve upon, and get out there and paddle a lot and paddle safe.
Fantastic, Keith. I love how you really kind of emphasize the need to systematize this as a process and really continue to lean and focus on this as a skill development. This is a skill. We've got a great question here from Simon that I'd love to present to you, Keith. Is he's encountered a situation where the leader freaked out on the situation and obviously lost confidence and control. How do you handle this sort of thing, both preliminarily and reactively?
Okay, so I might sound like a broken record, but I'm going to guess that there was poor planning ahead of this, that the leader freaked out because he got into stuff that he wasn't prepared for or wasn't expecting. And proper planning ahead of time will avoid this. But, that's a tough one. If the leader of the group is actually losing his mind and control over the situation, it was poor pre-planning to begin with.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for that, Keith. And again, I want to thank you for your time today and for this great information here. As we move into just opening this up to an open chat here, I want to put in a couple of links here for folks that want to follow Keith. He can be found on Facebook. I just put a Facebook link, keith.braun.365 into that. And also you can find Keith on Instagram, and I'll put Keith's Instagram account in the chat as well. It's Living Life Unleashed. Love that.